This is the story of a locked door and a cold administrative notification that changed the British monarchy forever. In less than 24 hours, the illusion of absolute control that Camilla had spent 30 years building was completely shattered. Not by a screaming match, but by a quiet stroke of a pen. What Camilla just realised behind closed doors is that while she may wear the crown, she actually owns absolutely nothing. In this video, we are going to unpack the secret commercial power grab her family desperately attempted, how Prince William silently uncovered the paper trail, and the devastating, ruthless retaliation that followed. We will explore the chilling realisation that swept through Clarence. How, as Camilla discovered, her royal empire was entirely hollow, and how William weaponized the royal institution to execute the ultimate silent revenge. To understand the catastrophic weight of this collapse, you first have to understand the staggering heights of the illusion Camilla lived within. For decades, she operated with an air of quiet, untouchable invincibility. She had successfully navigated the most hostile public relations landscape in modern history, transitioning from the ultimate royal mistress to the crowned Queen Consort of the United Kingdom. She had systematically and ruthlessly erased Diana's legacy from the palace halls, replacing the late princess's staff patronages and memory with her own loyalists. She believed she had King Charles completely and irrevocably managed. During the coronation, she boldly elevated her non-royal children Tom and Laura into the highest social stratospheres, insisting on roles for her grandchildren that visually placed her bloodline on par with the ancient royal house. She moved through the grand estates like a conqueror who had finally secured her empire. She opened the doors of royal properties to her relatives whenever she pleased. She possessed the title, she possessed the husband, and she believed with supreme arrogance that she possessed the future. But titles do not pay the bills, and the reality of commercial desperation is a profoundly powerful motivator. As King Charles's health became an inescapable, albeit whispered, topic of private anxiety within the palace, a cold panic began to spread through Camilla's inner circle. Her family, specifically her son Tom Parker Bowles and her sister Annabel Elliot, recognized a terrifying mathematical truth. Without Charles breathing and wearing the crown, they had no institutional protection whatsoever. They owned no historic estates. They controlled no sovereign wealth. This realization triggered an aggressive, covert attempt to permanently attach themselves to the Duchy of Cornwall. The Duchy is not just a bank account, it is a billion-dollar private estate that funds the heir to the throne. It is a sprawling empire of land, commercial real estate, and agricultural holdings. Before this moment, Tom had leveraged his unwritten royal connections to build a lucrative culinary and lifestyle brand, quietly opening high society doors that would otherwise remain firmly shut. But now the stakes were existential. An investment group deeply entangled with the Parker, Bowles and Shan families attempted to secure a highly lucrative, multi-decade lease on prime commercial real estate in South London owned by the Duchy. They did not apply openly. They buried their involvement in a sophisticated labyrinth of holding entities and shell companies. It was a calculated administrative maneuver designed to guarantee generational wealth for Camilla's family, essentially attempting to siphon off the Duchy's assets and secure an unbreakable legal foothold right before the inevitable transfer of power to William. They were trying to lock themselves into the royal bank vault before the new manager could change the codes. But they tragically miscalculated the one element of the royal machine they could never manipulate. When Prince William officially assumed absolute authority over the Duchy of Cornwall, he did not simply step into a ceremonial role. He inherited an elite intelligence apparatus and he wielded it with a cold precision that his father never possessed. William's first act was not a grand public statement, it was a forensic financial audit. William's estate managers, acting under his direct, uncompromising instructions, dismantled the corporate maze attached to that South London property application. They traced every hidden holding company, every blind trust, right back to Camilla's family network. And what they placed on William's desk was not just a single rejected application, but a documented history of parasitic overreach. The paper trail revealed years of quiet preferential treatments. It uncovered heavily subsidized agricultural leases handed to Parker Bowles Associates decades ago, quietly rubber-stamped by compliant courtiers. William sat in his office looking at undeniable empirical proof that his stepmother's family had been quietly treating his inheritance as their own personal ATM. What happened next was a masterclass in institutional warfare. William did not leak a furious story to the tabloids. He did not scream at his father. He used the cold, devastating machinery of the crown to completely dismantle Camilla's world. First, the commercial lease application was categorically denied with no avenue for appeal. A permanent flag was placed on any future dealings with those associated corporate entities. Then, William moved on to the existing infrastructure. For years, Camilla's sister Annabel Elliot had enjoyed a highly lucrative, unscrutinized position as the chief interior design consultant for the royal estates. This role gave her a massive guaranteed income from the royal household budget, but more importantly, it gave her unchecked access to the most private sanctuaries of the royal family. It was a position handed to her by Charles, bypassing all standard competitive bidding processes, an arrangement of staggering nepotism that nobody had dared to challenge while Charles held the purse strings. You have to understand the deep psychological weight of this specific retaliation. Annabel's house was the very location where Charles and Camilla hid their affair for years. It was the safe house where they dismantled Diana's life, protected from the press, laughing behind closed doors while a young mother spiraled into despair. William knew this. He had carried that bitter burning knowledge for his entire adult life. He carried it silently while he watched Annabel get paid millions to decorate the homes that should have belonged to his mother. So, when William signed the directive immediately terminating Annabel's contracts, he was not just cutting off a financial artery. He was executing a deeply personal judgment. He was officially erasing the architect of his mother's torment from the royal payroll. There was no gentle transition period. There was no polite public statement thanking Annabel for her years of service. Her access passes were physically revoked. Her security clearance was permanently wiped. She was completely locked out of the estates she once treated as her own private canvas. The execution of these orders was delivered to Clarence House, not by a senior royal, not by William himself, but by a mid-level palace administrator. Camilla was handed a sterile bureaucratic envelope detailing the immediate termination of her family's access to the duchy's wealth. It was the ultimate visual humiliation. The woman who wore the Queen Consort's crown was being informed of her own eviction from real power by a messenger. The people working in the palace that day noted that when the door to Camilla's private sitting room closed, the silence that followed was suffocating. The reality of her commercial desperation finally set in. The panic was instantaneous and violent. Tom Parker Bowles and Annabel Elliot flooded her phone lines. They demanded that she fix it. They demanded that she use her legendary influence over the king to reverse William's orders. They threatened that if she could not protect their financial interests, the loyalty they had maintained for decades might suddenly evaporate. But the chilling truth that washed over Camilla in that moment, the truth that made the blood freeze in her veins, was that her influence had reached its absolute limit. William now held the legal and financial authority over the estates. He held the money, he held the land, and he held the institutional power. Camilla realized with horrifying clarity that she was trapped inside a gilded cage. She had spent 30 years fighting for a title, only to discover that William had quietly engineered a reality where her title came with absolutely no keys to the kingdom, cornered by her furious, financially desperate family, and locked out by her ruthless stepson. She realized there was only one move left. She had to walk down the hall, confront King Charles, and force him to choose between the son who held the future and the wife who was suddenly holding nothing. The walk down the grand corridor to King Charles's private study was the longest walk of Camilla's royal life. When she closed the heavy oak doors behind her, she abandoned the careful, soothing diplomacy that had defined their relationship for decades. She was shaking. She laid out the sheer brutality of William's administrative purge, the immediate financial ruin threatening her family, and the terrifying ultimatum her sister Annabel had just delivered over the phone. She looked at the man who had torn his life apart to make her his queen, and she demanded that he stop his son. Charles sat behind his desk and listened. Camilla waited for the familiar outrage, the fierce protective instinct that had shielded her from the world since the 1990s. Instead, what she received was a devastating silence. Charles looked at his wife not as a husband defending his partner, but as a king recognizing the absolute limits of his own mortality. He simply told her quietly and without emotion that he would not intervene. The duchy belongs to William now, he explained. The constitutional boundary has been drawn and my hands are tied. That detail matters. That is where the story changes completely. For 30 years, Camilla had operated under the absolute certainty that if pushed to the brink, Charles would always choose her over public opinion, over his family, and over the institution itself. But standing in that room, she realized that the illusion of absolute power had an expiration date. Charles was refusing to save her not because he did not care, but because he understood that interfering with William's sovereign inheritance would trigger a catastrophic dynastic war he could no longer win. The king chose the survival of the crown over the commercial comfort of his wife's relatives. The commercial desperation of the Parker Bowles and Shand families was now sealed. They had spent years slowly embedding themselves into the fringes of the royal portfolio, confusing proximity to the throne with actual ownership. Now, the drawbridge was pulled up permanently. Without Annabel's lucrative design contracts and without Tom's unchecked access to royal assets, they were completely locked out. To understand the absolute humiliation of this moment, you have to look at the protocol shift. Camilla's family could no longer use the private family entrances to the estates. They were suddenly required to submit formal access requests and enter through the side doors, logging their names with security like ordinary civilian contractors. And as Camilla's empire was systematically dismantled, a new order quietly filled the vacuum. What looked like a routine administrative update was actually a total dismantling of her empire, paving the way for the restoration of the rightful hierarchy. William did not just remove Annabel Elliot from her post, he immediately reassigned the interior. Oversight of key royal estates to the Prince and Princess of Wales's own trusted household staff. Almost overnight, the aesthetic and psychological grip Camilla held over the royal residences began to evaporate. Catherine, who had spent years offering uncomplaining sacrifice to the institution, was now silently assuming her rightful place as the true matriarch of the royal future. Palace insiders began to notice subtle, yet devastatingly symbolic shifts that carried enormous weight. Artworks and historical portraits that had been quietly moved into storage. During Camilla's aggressive ascent began reappearing in prominent corridors. Spaces that had been culturally scrubbed of Diana's memory were being silently reclaimed by William's authority. It was a forensic, emotionally intelligent reclamation of history. William was utilizing the exact institutional machinery Camilla had used to erase his mother, only he was using it to erase Camilla's influence instead. Every restored painting, every revoked security pass, every changed lock was a silent message echoing through the palace walls. Camilla has finally achieved her life's ultimate ambition. She wears the crown, she's addressed as Her Majesty, and she sits beside the king. But the devastating contrast of her reality is that she is sitting on a throne that rests on property she does not own. Funded by wealth she cannot touch and managed by a stepson who will never forget what she cost him. She is completely isolated, trapped between a bloodline that refuses to forgive her and a family that is furiously demanding payouts she can no longer provide. She won the bitter decades-long battle for the marriage, but Prince William, wielding his grief as a weapon and utilizing the cold restraint of the system, has permanently won the war for the institution. Thank you for watching. If you found this analysis of the royal family's shifting power dynamics insightful, please consider subscribing to the channel and sharing your thoughts in the comments below. We will continue to document the hidden realities behind the palace gates,